Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez came to the defense of Ilhan Omar over this false narrative that the conservatives have generated. Now, before I even get to what exactly they are saying about Ilhan Omar, let me first give you the full context of this speech that they are pulling a piece out of to make it seem like Ilhan Omar said something that she didn't. So let me play this. This is about a minute-long piece of this speech that Ilhan Omar gave last month.
Far too long, we have lived with the discomfort of being a second-class citizen. And frankly, I'm tired of it, and every single Muslim in this country should be tired of it. CARE was founded after 9/11 because they recognized that some people did something and that all of us were starting to lose access to our civil liberties. So you can't just say that today someone is looking at me strange, that I am going to try to make myself look pleasant. You have to say, this person is looking at me strange. I am not comfortable with it. I am going to go talk to them and ask them why. Because that is a right you have.
All right, so watching this, without knowing the context of what conservatives are pulling out of this, this just sounds like a fairly straightforward speech about an important issue: bigotry and xenophobia directed towards Muslims. Now, what do you think conservatives pulled out of this? That, Ilhan Omar made a great point. Yes, she's right. Maybe we should be more conscious of how society has treated Muslims after 9/11. Because some Muslims were involved in the attacks on 9/11 doesn't mean that we should paint all Muslims the same way. She's right. We should be more aware of and conscious of how Muslims have been treated in Western society. Yeah, of course, that's not what they pulled out of this. Here's what they actually pulled out of this. So here's the New York Post headline. Ilhan Omar, 9/11 was some people did something. Here's your something. 2,977 people dead by terrorism. Yeah, so they pulled out 4 words out of her speech and made it sound like Ilhan Omar was being flippant about 9/11. Just completely manufacturing a narrative and honestly putting Ilhan Omar in danger. This is the kind of thing that radicalizes conservatives. She's already received death threats, a number of death threats to her life, and this is only going to accelerate that. Now, this false narrative, of course, was continued by many conservative politicians, including Dan Crenshaw, who tweeted out, "First member of Congress to ever describe terrorists who killed thousands of Americans on 9/11 as, quote, some people who did something. Unbelievable." Now, this is a sort of interesting attack because AOC points the picture of who Dan Crenshaw really is. You refuse to co-sponsor the 9/11 Victims Compensation Fund, yet have the audacity to drum resentment towards Ilhan with completely out-of-context quotes. In 2018, right-wing extremists were behind almost all U.S. domestic terrorist killings. Why don't you go do something about that? So here you have a Republican politician trying to paint Ilhan Omar as being insensitive towards 9/11. Meanwhile, Dan Crenshaw is refusing to co-sponsor the 9/11 Victims Compensation Fund. And look, this isn't just AOC saying this. A New York firefighter who survived 9/11 says Republican criticizing Ilhan Omar told him he was, quote, too busy to talk victim benefits. So that's who Crenshaw is. Now, let me give you I just want to play this clip. This is from MSNBC. This is Waleed Shahid on Chris Hayes, who's so Waleed Shahid is the Justice Democrats spokesperson. Ilhan Omar, of course, is a Justice Democrat, as is AOC. So he was talking about the failure of the Democratic leadership here to come to Ilhan Omar's defense.
This seems like just a bad faith, out of context hit job to me.
I mean, there's a 200-mile-per-hour ideological right-wing war machine coming after Ilhan Omar and also Rashida Tlaib and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. My question is, where is the Democratic Party leadership on this? You didn't see that many comments today from candidates running for president in 2020. You didn't see that many comments from Nancy Pelosi or Steny Hoyer or Chuck Schumer, for that matter. Instead, what we've seen is a pattern from the Democratic Party leadership that tries to distance themselves away from these three women, instead of seeing these women as the rising leaders in the party who they have to fight for. When you are faced with this war machine, you've got to fight back and you've got to defend people in your party. And just last week, Nancy Pelosi said something like, the women with the large amounts of Twitter followers are not necessarily representative of the Democratic Party. But I think we need a Democratic Party that actually fights for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, for Ilhan Omar, for Rashida Tlaib against these attacks, because they can't keep running away from it and, make fun of them at AIPAC like Schumer and Hoyer did, or pile on the attacks. So I was actually pretty saddened to see it was just these women sticking up for each other, the three women who I've mentioned, and Ayanna Pressley, but not much from the leadership.
That, Waleed, to me is like when you talk about the Democratic leadership doesn't want a bunch of controversy every week, right? Like from their perspective, it's like Ilhan Omar does not care that they're coming after her, clearly. She's not going to be cowed. I think that's also true of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. It's true of Rashida Tlaib. And the sort of posture in politics of the Democratic leadership is like, we don't want to be on Fox News every night, and we don't want to be fighting these defensive fights.
Well, we're kind of in a battle globally for, the fate of multiracial liberal democracy, so they don't really have a choice.
Yeah.
Ilhan Omar represents multiracial liberal democracy just like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez does, or Rashida Tlaib. That is the fight that we're having all over the world, from America to New Zealand, and we really have to, the Democratic Party needs to be the fight of the party of multiracial liberalism. Conservatives are going to war for conservatism. Liberals should go to war for liberalism.
Well, war in a rhetorical sense.
Yeah.
Just to be clear.
So a great job by Waleed Shahid here to point out the failure of the Democratic Party leadership to not come to the defense of Ilhan Omar and really drive these points home. I mean, this is something we have seen for the past 40 years. The Democratic Party continuing to capitulate to Republican Party talking points, not willing to fight or unable to fight. I mean, it really shows you the perfect example of how the Democratic Party is not only a failure in terms of policy, in terms of neoliberal policy that continues to put the best interests of corporations and the wealthy above everybody else, but also the failure of their party strategically. I mean, just in terms of fighting for your own people, the Democratic leadership does not do this. They are on the correct side of the issue here. Republicans and conservatives are taking Ilhan Omar out of context and are attacking her over it, threatening her life over this, and the leadership continues to fail to come to their defense and even does the opposite in terms of actually poking at them, whether it's at AIPAC with their speeches talking about, there's more than just three new Congress people in Congress. I mean, that was a quote from Steny Hoyer that I did a video on, where they're continuing to single out and act like these Justice Democrats aren't really a part of the Democratic Party, even though these Justice Democrats are exactly what is bringing energy into the Democratic Party. So this continued failure from the leadership to actually stand up for progressive values and for their Congress people is just honestly disgusting.